dance floor.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, like, from Boys in the Hood, I had a nude scene.
Yeah.
And I was reluctant to take the role because of the nude scene.
Sure.
Nia Long knows her makeup. Nia Long knows her hair. And you probably can't talk me into something else unless you show me. If you want to call that difficult, then sorry.
At 41, Nia Long was finally ready to set the record straight on the disturbing rumors that had followed her for decades. Hollywood called her difficult for knowing her worth and refusing to compromise her standards.
I was like, oh, do you want the brown-skinned spicy girl or do you want the light-skinned spicy girl? Which one do you want? And if you look at the history of film during that time, you will see how we were divided.
The industry pitted black actresses against each other, while men got rich off their talent. For 30 years, she played by their rules and stayed quiet about the real cost of success.
And he says to me, hey, how are you? And I'm like, I couldn't speak. I was just like speechless. And he says, do you want to have a drink with me? And I'm like, but you're Prince. And I just couldn't do it. I felt like...
Now, decades of silence were about to end. The secrets Hollywood didn't want you to know were finally coming to light, and Nia Long wasn't holding back anymore. Let's get into it. In the early 1990s, when Nia Long first stepped onto the scene in Boys in the Hood, Hollywood had a very specific way of casting black women. It wasn't about talent alone, or even about who was right for the role. It was about fitting into neat little boxes that executives could understand and market to their audiences.
When I started really working as an actress, there were about 4 of us. Jada Pinkett Smith, Halle Berry, Regina King, and Jasmine Guy. But the women that I was in constant competition with, mostly it was me and Jada.
4 women. 4 incredibly talented, beautiful, complex actresses reduced to a casting director's game of mix and match. For Nia, the competition wasn't just professional. It was deeply personal and racially charged in ways that the industry pretended not to see. The choice, as she would later discover, often came down to something as shallow as skin tone. Casting directors would literally hold up photos and ask, do you want the brown-skinned spicy girl or the light-skinned spicy girl? As if these women were interchangeable flavors rather than distinct artists with their own unique talents.
I was like, oh, do you want the brown-skinned spicy girl or do you want the light-skinned spicy girl? Which one do you want?
This division wasn't accidental. Hollywood had learned that by pitting black actresses against each other, they could maintain control over who got which opportunities. Instead of expanding roles for black women, they kept the same limited number of parts and made the women fight for them. The competition between Nia and Jada Pinkett Smith became particularly intense, not because of any personal animosity, but because they were constantly being offered the same types of roles. When the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was looking for Will Smith's girlfriend, both women auditioned. Nia got the part, but she knew that tomorrow it could just as easily go the other way. What made this system particularly cruel was how it prevented black actresses from supporting each other. Instead of building a community, they were forced into a zero-sum game where one woman's success meant another's disappointment. The industry had weaponized their ambitions against each other. But Nia understood something that took years for the industry to recognize. She and her contemporaries weren't competing against each other. They were fighting together against a system that wanted to limit their possibilities. Each role they landed, each barrier they broke, created opportunities for the next generation of black actresses. The Spicy Girl label itself was problematic, reducing complex women to one-dimensional characters who existed primarily to provide flavor to white-centered stories. Nia refused to accept this limitation, even when it meant being difficult. The division strategy worked for a while, keeping talented black actresses focused on competing with each other instead of demanding more opportunities overall. But women like Nia began to see through the game. They realized that the real enemy wasn't each other. It was a system that refused to create enough space for all of them to succeed. This realization would eventually lead to a different kind of reputation for Nia Long. When she stopped playing by rules designed to keep her in her place, when she started demanding respect and fair treatment, Hollywood had a word for women like her: difficult. The irony wasn't lost on her. An industry that had profited from her talent, her beauty, and her ability to bring authenticity to every role was now punishing her for having opinions about how that talent should be treated. The same executives who praised her work in private meetings were whispering about her attitude in industry circles. But Nia was just getting started. If they wanted to call her difficult for knowing her worth, she was ready to show them exactly how difficult she could be. Success in Hollywood often comes with unexpected encounters, and for Nia Long, one of the most surreal moments of her early career happened not on a movie set, but in a Los Angeles nightclub. She was 18 years old, just starting to make a name for herself, when one of music's biggest superstars decided to shoot his shot.
I don't know how I ended up in Roxbury Club at 18. I'm sure I had a fake ID at that time because you did need to be 21. I was walking by and someone grabbed my hand and I turned around and I'm like, it's Prince.
The Roxbury was the kind of place where celebrities went to see and be seen. But Nia wasn't there as a star. She was just a young woman trying to figure out her place in the industry. When someone grabbed her hand that night, the last person she expected to see was Prince, one of the most iconic artists of their generation. For most 18-year-olds, having Prince ask you out would be the ultimate fantasy come true. But Nia's reaction was different. She was intimidated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of who he was versus who she felt she was at that moment in her life.
And he says to me, hey, how are you? And I'm like, I couldn't speak. I was just speechless. And he says, do you want to have a drink with me? And I'm like, but you're Prince. And I just couldn't do it.
But you're Prince. 3 words that captured the insecurity and self-doubt that many young actresses experience when thrust into Hollywood's upper echelons. Despite her growing success, Nia still saw herself as the girl from Brooklyn trying to make it, not someone who belonged in the same social circle as music royalty. The encounter revealed something important about Nia's character that would define her entire career. She had boundaries. Even at 18, even when faced with one of the biggest stars in the world, she knew when something didn't feel right for her. This wasn't about rejecting Prince personally. It was about trusting her instincts about what she was ready for.
He loved my short hair, and that was the topic of conversation.
Wait, but was who invited him?
Well, my publicist, because by then I had
Oh, yeah, okay.
But throughout those
So
years,
she
had he
sprinkled in,
ever...
he said, I'm in.
And
did you make out with him then?
I should have.
When Prince showed up at her 21st birthday party years later, the dynamic had shifted. Nia had gained confidence, had a few more movies under her belt, and had a publicist. All signs that she was moving up in the industry. Prince's fascination with her short hair wasn't just casual conversation. It was recognition of her distinctive style and presence. The Pixie cut that Prince admired would become one of Nia's signatures, inspiring countless women to embrace their natural beauty and reject conventional standards of femininity. It was a bold choice in an industry that often demanded long, flowing hair from its leading ladies, but it perfectly captured Nia's willingness to stand out rather than blend in. This ability to say no, to trust her instincts even when it meant turning down seemingly amazing opportunities, would become a defining characteristic of Nia's career. It was the same quality that would later get her labeled as difficult when she applied it to professional situations. The Prince encounter also highlighted another aspect of her personality that would serve her well in Hollywood's treacherous waters. She remained grounded regardless of who was paying attention to her. Fame didn't intoxicate her or make her lose sight of her own values and boundaries. Years later, when Nia reflected on that night at the Roxbury, she realized it was one of her first lessons in Hollywood power dynamics. Prince was attracted to her precisely because she didn't throw herself at him like everyone else did. Her authenticity and self-possession were magnetic qualities that would attract leading men throughout her career. and occasionally intimidate executives who preferred their actresses more pliable. The decision to trust her gut about Prince would prove prophetic. Throughout her career, Nia would face countless situations where the smart career move would conflict with what felt right to her personally. Each time she chose authenticity over opportunity, integrity over advancement. Choices that built her reputation as an actress, but also branded her as someone who couldn't be easily controlled. By the mid-1990s, Nia Long had established herself as one of Hollywood's most reliable leading ladies. Films like Friday, Love Jones, and Soul Food had proven her box office appeal and dramatic range. But success came with its own set of challenges, particularly for a black actress who refused to compromise her standards. The rumors about Nia being difficult didn't start with one dramatic incident. They began accumulating through dozens of smaller moments where she dared to advocate for herself in an industry that preferred its actresses grateful and compliant.
Nia Long knows her makeup. Nia Long knows her hair. And you probably can't talk me into something else unless you show me. If you want to call that difficult, then sorry.
This wasn't ego talking. This was expertise. After years of walking into hair and makeup trailers where no one knew how to work with black skin and hair, Nia had become her own best advocate. She carried a Ziploc bag of her own products because she couldn't rely on film sets to provide what she needed to look her best. The difficult label often came from her refusal to accept substandard treatment in areas where white actresses never had to fight. When she insisted on having makeup artists who understood how to work with her complexion, or hairstylists who knew how to handle textured hair, executives saw demands rather than basic professional needs. What frustrated Nia most was the double standard. Male actors were praised for being perfectionists or detail-oriented when they made similar requests about their appearance or performance. But when she applied the same level of professionalism to her craft, she was labeled as high maintenance. The financial aspects were equally troubling. Despite her proven track record and bankable status, Nia consistently found herself fighting for fair compensation, while watching male co-stars and executives profit handsomely from her work. She watched men get rich off films where she was the star or co-lead, while her own paycheck remained relatively modest. When she asked for more money, more control, or better billing, the whispers would start, "Nia's being difficult again." The systemic nature of the problem became clear when she realized this wasn't happening to her alone. Black actresses across Hollywood were facing similar challenges, but the industry had convinced them that speaking up would damage their careers. The silence was strategic. It kept them isolated and easier to exploit. Nia's reputation for being difficult actually became a badge of honor among her peers. Other actresses would quietly thank her for fighting battles they couldn't fight themselves, for asking questions they were afraid to ask, for setting standards they wished they could demand. The irony wasn't lost on her that the same industry calling her difficult was simultaneously relying on her professionalism and talent to make their projects successful. She never missed her marks, never showed up unprepared, and always delivered performances that elevated the material. Her difficulty was really just her refusal to accept less than she deserved. Behind closed doors, directors and producers would admit that working with Nia made their films better. Her insights about character development, her understanding of what worked for her on screen, and her commitment to authenticity improved every project she touched. But publicly, they continued to perpetuate the narrative that she was challenging to work with. The breaking point came later in her career when she realized that playing by their rules, staying quiet, and hoping for fairness wasn't working. The same executives who had built careers on her talent were still treating her as if she should be grateful for whatever scraps they offered. For the first time in her 36-year career, Nia Long walked off a set. It broke her heart to do it, but she finally understood that some battles were worth fighting, even if it meant confirming everyone's worst assumptions about her being difficult. The industry's reaction was predictable. More whispers, more rumors, more confirmation that Nia Long was exactly as challenging as they'd always said she was. But this time, she didn't care. She had finally learned the difference between being difficult and being powerful. And she chose power. September 2022 started like any other month for Nia Long. She was juggling multiple projects, caring for her 2 sons, and settling into life in Boston after relocating to support her fiancé, Ime Udoka's coaching career with the Celtics. After over a decade together, their relationship seemed solid, their family unit strong, their future planned. Then her phone rang with news that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her life. The betrayal was devastating enough on its own, but what made it infinitely worse was how public the Celtics organization chose to make it. Instead of handling Ime's violation of team policies privately, they released statements that turned Nia's personal pain into national headlines. Within hours, Nia Long was trending on social media, not because of a new movie role or career achievement, but because she had become the unwitting victim in someone else's scandal. The woman who had spent decades carefully crafting her public image suddenly found herself at the center of a story she had no control over. The cruelest irony was that for once, public opinion was entirely on her side. Social media united in support of Nia, with people expressing outrage that anyone would cheat on such a beloved figure. But their sympathy couldn't protect her most vulnerable concern, her children. 11-year-old Kez's face when the news broke would haunt Nia forever. Her son, who had done nothing wrong, suddenly found himself the subject of schoolyard whispers and media attention. She made the difficult decision to pull him out of school temporarily, prioritizing his emotional well-being over everything else. The Boston Celtics organization, which had profited from her presence at games and used her relationship with Ime as part of their family-friendly marketing, disappeared when she needed support most. No one from the organization called to check on her or her children. No one offered resources or assistance during what was clearly a traumatic time for her family. The abandonment by the Celtics was particularly painful because it revealed how quickly organizations could discard the collateral damage of their decisions. They had suspended Ime and moved on with their season, but Nia and her children were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives without any institutional support. The scandal also forced Nia to confront uncomfortable truths about how women are treated when powerful men fail. Despite being the innocent party, she found herself having to manage the public narrative, protect her children's privacy, and rebuild her life while the man who had caused the pain got to issue a brief apology and move on to his next coaching opportunity. The stress of the situation was compounded by the fact that she had uprooted her life to move to Boston for Ime's career. She had left her established support system in Los Angeles, enrolled Kez in a new school, and was in the process of house hunting when everything fell apart. Now she faced the prospect of moving again, disrupting her children's lives once more because of decisions she had no part in making. What struck her most was how the entire situation reinforced every lesson she had learned about being difficult in Hollywood. For years, she had been told that standing up for herself, setting boundaries, and refusing to accept less than she deserved was problematic. But watching how quickly she was abandoned when someone else's actions created chaos in her life, she realized that being accommodating had never actually protected her. The scandal became an unexpected catalyst for a new phase of Nia's life. If the industry had always been ready to call her difficult, and if life was going to be challenging regardless of how compliant she tried to be, then she might as well be difficult on her own terms. She might as well fight for what she deserved, protect what mattered to her, and refuse to accept situations that didn't serve her and her children. The Ime Udoka scandal didn't make Nia Long difficult. It finally gave her permission to stop pretending that being easy would keep her safe. At 53, Nia Long has finally reached the point in her life where other people's opinions about her difficulty have become irrelevant. The woman who once worried about being labeled as challenging now wears the title as a badge of honor. Proof that she has learned to value her own peace over everyone else's comfort. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was forged through decades of industry battles, personal betrayals, and the gradual realization that being accommodating had never actually protected her from the very consequences she had spent her career trying to avoid.
You need to find something you're passionate about. Redefine your purpose.
The move back to Los Angeles with her 2 sons represented more than just a geographic change. It was a complete life reset. After years of trying to blend her ambitions with someone else's career trajectory, Nia was finally putting her own needs and her children's well-being first. For the first time in her 36-year career, she had walked off a film set because the working conditions didn't meet her standards. The decision that once would have terrified her, confirming every whisper about her being difficult to work with, now felt like the most natural thing in the world. The project she abandoned wasn't just poorly managed, it represented everything she had decided to stop tolerating. White directors who didn't understand how to tell Black stories authentically. Producers who expected her to educate them about her own culture while paying her less than her white counterparts. Crews who weren't equipped to work with black hair and skin, but expected her to make it work anyway. Walking away sent a clear message to the industry. Nia Long was no longer available for projects that didn't value her expertise, respect her contributions, or compensate her fairly. If that made her difficult, so be it. The response from her peers was telling. Instead of criticism, she received support from other actresses who had wanted to make similar stands but had been afraid of the professional consequences. Her willingness to walk away gave others permission to raise their own standards. The Ime Udoka scandal, as devastating as it had been personally, also provided unexpected clarity about what really mattered. The public's overwhelming support during her darkest moment reminded her that authentic connections with audiences were more valuable than industry approval. People didn't love her because she was easy to work with. They loved her because she was real. After decades of fighting for recognition, she no longer needed external validation to know what she brought to every project. The memoir she announced would chronicle not just her career highlights, but the behind-the-scenes battles that had shaped her into the woman she had become. For the first time, she was ready to tell the complete truth about what it meant to be a Black actress in Hollywood, including the parts that might make some people uncomfortable. Her approach to future projects reflected this new mindset. Instead of taking roles because they were offered or because she needed the work, she was now choosing projects that aligned with her values and served her artistic goals. If producers weren't prepared to meet her standards, they could find someone else. The industry's definition of difficult had always been about maintaining their comfort level, not about actual professional behavior. Nia had never been late, unprepared, or unprofessional. Her crime had been expecting fair treatment, quality working conditions, and respect for her expertise. At 53, she understood that being called difficult by people who had never valued her properly was actually a compliment. It meant she had stopped making their lives easier at the expense of her own well-being. The rumors that had followed her for decades, that she was hard to work with, demanding, entitled, no longer carried the sting they once did. She had lived through public scandal, personal betrayal, and professional retaliation, and she was still standing. More than that, she was thriving on her own terms. The little girl from Brooklyn who had once felt intimidated by Prince's attention had evolved into a woman who knew exactly what she deserved and wasn't afraid to demand it. If that made her difficult in Hollywood's eyes, then difficult was exactly what she intended to be. After all, the alternative, being easy, had never actually been easier. It had just been harder in different ways, ways that required her to sacrifice pieces of herself that she was no longer willing to give up. At 53, Nia Long had finally learned that the most disturbing rumor of all would be that she had stopped fighting for herself. Anyway, that's it for this video, folks. Bye.